Hello and welcome to this fifth Chronicle of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, entitled The Horse and His Boy, which you'll see is a kind of Arabian Night story. It's the most unusual of all the Chronicles. We begin with an introduction to a boy named Shasta. He's about 13 years old and who has lived with a poor fisherman called Arshish in Calormen. Now, where is Calormen? Calormen is a country far to the south of Narnia. In Calormen, there's a king who's named Tisroc. There's a capital city entitled Tashban, and they all worship a god who they call Tash, a false god. Now, for anyone reading this story 60 to 70 years after it was written, we today would interpret Calormen as a Muslim country and the people living in it as Islams, worshiping a false god. And that's just something you need to know if you're reading it today. Now, Arshish was cruel to Shasta, and he treated him as a servant or a slave, not as a son. Shasta spent most of his time working, mending nets, cleaning their hut, and cooking for Arshish. One day, a stranger from the south came riding to their hut and asked for a night's food and lodging. In other words, hospitality. Shasta was told to stay out of the way and look after the stranger's horse. But Shasta listened to their conversation from behind a door and heard them bargaining. The stranger wanted to buy Shasta as his personal slave. Here, Arshish admits that Shasta is not his son. That years ago, one night, when he couldn't sleep and went out to sit on the seashore, a boat came floating in with the tide. In the boat was a soldier, starved to death, and also there was a baby. So he took the baby and raised him as his own. Shasta went to see about the stranger's horse, happy to know that he wasn't Arshish's real son, and happy that he might leave his home, if only as a slave. But then he wonders what sort of man the stranger is, and he says to the horse, "How I wish you could talk." And the horse replies, "But I can." The horse then explains that he was born in Narnia, where there are many talking animals, as we already know. But he was stolen when only a foal and taken south to Calormen, where he hasn't dared to talk to anyone because they would treat him like a circus freak when he was born and bred to be a war horse. He's talking to Shasta because he thinks they both have a reason to escape from Calormen together and go north. The stranger is a very cruel man, and Shasta would be treated badly by him. So when Arshish and the stranger go to sleep, Shasta and the horse, whose name is Bree, ride off, with Bree having to teach Shasta how to ride him. They travel for several days north along the coast to the capital city of Tashban, because it's not only the most direct route, but also Bree is familiar with this territory. They travel at night to avoid other travelers and sleep in the daytime. One night, They hear strange, ferocious noises from behind them, and thinking it's lions chasing them, they gallop at full speed for some distance. And when they cross a shallow inlet, they notice another rider just parallel to them, galloping alongside of them like horses in a race, apparently fleeing from the lions also. Imagine their surprise when they hear the rider and the horse talking to each other, thinking the other horse must be a fellow Narnian. Bree speaks to the other horse, and they both stop for a rest, now that they seem to have escaped from the lions. To Shasta's surprise, the other rider turns out to be a girl. And she's dressed like a warrior, but definitely of a higher social class than he is. She came from one of the richest families in Calormen, and her father had arranged a marriage for her with a rich 60-year-old man who was fat and had a face like an ape. The girl, whose name is Aravis, was going to kill herself, but her horse, named Hwyn, talked her into escaping instead to Narnia, where Hwyn was born. So Aravis tells her father she wants to spend 3 days in the mountains sacrificing to Tash, the false god, in preparation for her marriage. She then packs clothing, jewels, and money and sets out instead for Tashban, and then on to Narnia, where they get chased by lions in the dark, and then, of course, meet Shasta and Bree. As they near the city gates of Tashban, they make plans out as how to safely go through it or around it. They decide the safest thing is to go through the city and meet, if they get lost, at the tombs, which look like large stone beehives at the northern end of the city. And as a procession of Narnians go by them in the street, and among them are Edmund and Susan. Susan mistakes Shasta for someone named Corin, and they grab Shasta and take him with the Narnians to the royal guest house they're staying in. Shasta doesn't tell Edmund and Susan that he's not Corin, who is some kind of a prince, because he's afraid they'll think he's a spy or an escaped slave. So he's with them. As he's with them, he hears their plans. Susan, as a queen of Narnia, was visiting Tashban with Edmund to meet the son of the Tishrock. He's the prince, and his name is Rabadash, who wants to marry her. In the time that they've been there, she realizes that he's a self-centered, self-important brute who would probably treat her like a slave. The problem is, it looks like Rabadash and his father won't let them leave without Susan agreeing to the marriage. So they hatch a plan to escape on their ship. After deciding on the plan, they leave Shasta alone to rest, and the real Prince Corin comes climbing through the window, obviously having been fighting. When they see each other, it's like each is looking in a mirror, the prince and the pauper in Mark Twain's story, Prince Corin and Shasta, both obviously twins. Then Shasta realizes that he needs to leave before the others come. So he leaves the city and finds the tombs to wait on the others. During this time, Aravis also is recognized, but as herself by an old girlfriend from a rich family. Aravis and the 2 horses are taken by the girlfriend to her royal guest house, where she helps Aravis to escape from the city. But before she escapes, she overhears Rabadash and his father discussing the escape of the Narnians and how they plan to be revenged upon them by taking a small army across the desert between Calormen and Aukerland. And Aukerland is a friendly country to Narnia, between the desert and Narnia. And they want to attack Narnia while King Peter is away. He's away fighting giants in the north, of course. And then forcing Susan to return as his wife. So Aravis leaves Tashbin with the 2 horses, and they meet Shasta at the tombs. Shasta had spent a scary night alone, waiting for them, but was comforted by a cat who stayed with him and who scared away some jackals. So the 4 cross the desert, and that's Aravis, Shasta, and their 2 horses, and they reach Auchenland. Then, to their horror, they hear what must be the Calormen army coming up behind them. Then, as if that weren't enough, they are attacked from behind by 2 lions. Shasta escapes one of them, but he sees another about to get Aravis. So Shasta goes back for her and dives at the lion who runs away, saving the life of Aravis and showing what sort of courage he had. So now they're in Auchenland, and they come upon the home of a hermit who is kindly and who gives them food and rest. But Shasta has no time to rest. He has to get to the word to the king of Auchenland, who is Prince Corin's father, his twin's father, and as we know now, his father, that Rabadash and his army of 200 are going to attack his castle. Though tired and hungry, Shasta pushes ahead on foot to find the king. And the king's name is King Loon, which he does soon, and who, of course, mistakes Shasta for his own son. They give Shasta a horse, but he can't keep up with them, and he gets lost, trying to find his way alone to the castle where the battle will be. He is guided by a lion through the fog. And who is that lion? "Who are you?" Shasta said, scarcely above a whisper. "One who has waited long for you to speak," said the thing. Its voice was not loud, but very large and deep. Are you a giant?" asked Shasta. "You might call me a giant," said the large voice, "but I am not like the creatures you call giants." "I can't see you at all," said Shasta, after staring very hard. Then, for an even more terrible idea came into his head. He said, almost in a scream, "You're not something dead, are you? Oh, please, please do go away. What harm have I ever done you? Oh, I am the unluckiest person in the whole world." Once more he felt the warm breath of the thing on his hand and face. "There," it said, "that is not the breath of a ghost. Tell me your sorrows." Shasta was a little reassured by the breath, so he told how he had never known his real father or mother and had been brought up sternly by the fishermen. And then he told the story of his escape and how they were chased by lions and forced to swim for their lives, and of all their dangers in Tashbin, and about his night among the tombs, and how the beast howled at him out of the desert, and he told about the heat and the thirst of their desert journey, and how they were almost at their goal when another lion chased them and wounded Aravis, and also how very long it was since he had had anything to eat. "I do not call you unfortunate," said the large voice. "Don't you think it was bad luck to meet so many lions?" said Shasta. "There was only one lion," said the voice. "What on earth do you mean? I've just told you there were at least two the first night, and there was only one. But he was swift of foot." "How do you know?" "I was the lion." And as Shasta gaped with open mouth and said nothing, the voice continued. "I was the lion who forced you to join with Aravis. I was the cat who comforted you among the houses of the dead. I was the lion who drove the jackals from you while you slept. I was the lion who gave the horses the new strength of fear for the last mile so that you could reach King Loon in time. And I was the lion you do not remember, who pushed the boat in which you lay, a child near death, so that it came to shore where a man sat, wakeful at midnight, to receive you. Then it was you who wounded Aravis. It was I. But for what?" "Child," said the voice, "I am telling you your story, not hers. I tell no one any story but his own." "Who are you?" asked Shasta. "Myself," said the voice, very deep and low, so that the earth shook. And again, "Myself," loud and clear and gay. And then the third time, "Myself," whispered so softly you could hardly hear it, and yet it seemed to come from all round you, as if the leaves rustled with it. Shasta was no longer afraid that the voice belonged to something that would eat him, nor that it was the voice of a ghost. But a new and different sort of trembling came over him. Yet he felt glad, too. The mist was turning from black to gray, and from gray to white. This must have begun to happen some time ago, but while he had been talking to the thing, he had not been noticing anything else. Now the whiteness around him became a shining whiteness. His eyes began to blink. Somewhere ahead, he could hear birds singing. He knew the night was over at last. He could see the mane and the ears and the head of his horse quite easily now. A golden light fell on them from the left. He thought it was the sun. He turned and saw, pacing beside him, taller than the horse, a lion. The horse did not seem to be afraid of it, or else could not see it. It was from the lion that the light came. No one ever saw anything more terrible or beautiful. Luckily, Shasta had lived all his life too far south in Calormen to have heard the tales that were whispered in Tashbin about a dreadful Narnian demon that appeared to be in the form of a lion. And of course, he knew none of the true stories about Aslan, the great lion, the son of the emperor over the sea, the king above all high kings in Narnia. But after one glance at the lion's face, he slipped out of the saddle and fell at its feet. He couldn't say anything, but then he didn't want to say anything, and he knew he needn't say anything. The high king above all kings stooped towards him. Its mane and some strange and solemn perfume that hung about the mane was all around him, It touched his forehead with its tongue. He lifted his face, and their eyes met. Then instantly the pale brightness of the mist and the fiery brightness of the lion rolled themselves together into a swirling glory and gathered themselves up and disappeared. He was alone with the horse on a grassy hillside under a blue sky. And there were birds singing. So Shasta meets Aslan. Then Shasta comes upon a house inhabited by dwarfs who feed him and let him sleep. He is awakened by Prince Corin, his twin, along with King Edmund, Queen Lucy, and other Narnian warriors who are on their way to assist King Lune against Rabadash. They had just arrived in Narnia by ship when they heard about the attacking army. So, to make a long battle short, they arrive at the Auchenland castle of King Lune as Rabadash is attacking it. Coming from behind, the Narnians hem Rabadash in, and he is defeated. Both Shasta and Corin fight bravely. Rabadash is captured alive, but the rest of his troops are killed, and he is taken as a prisoner. During the battle, the two horses and Aravis watch it by looking into a pool of water at the hermit's home. When they see it's a victory for Auchenland and Narnia, they begin to talk about finishing their journey by going on to Narnia. Here, Aravis asks Bree about Aslan. Bree, said Aravis, who was not very interested in the cut of his tail. I've been wanting to ask you something for a long time. Why do you keep on swearing by the lion and by the lion's mane? I thought you hated lions. So I do, answered Bree. But when I speak of the lion, of course, I mean Aslan, the great deliverer of Narnia, who drove away the witch and the winter. All Narnians swear by him. But is he a lion? No, of course not, said Bree in a rather shocked voice. All the stories about him in Tashbaan say he is, replied Aravis. And if he isn't a lion, why do you call him a lion? Well, you'd hardly understand that at your age, said Bree. And I was only a little foal when I left, so I don't quite fully understand it myself. Bree was standing with his back to the green wall while he was saying all this, and the other two were facing him. No doubt, continued Bree, when they speak of him as a lion, they only mean he's as strong as a lion, or, to our enemies, of course, as fierce as a lion, or something of that kind. Even a little girl like you, Aravis, must see that it would be quite absurd to suppose he is a real lion. Indeed, it would be disrespectful. If he was a lion, he'd have to be a beast, just like the rest of us. Why? And here Bree began to laugh. If he was a lion, he'd have 4 paws and a tail and whiskers. For just as he said that word, whiskers, one of Aslan's whiskers had actually tickled his ear. Bree shot away like an arrow to the other side of the enclosure, and there turned. The wall was too high for him to jump, and he could fly no further. Aravis and Huen both started back. There was about a second of intense silence. Then Huen, though shaking all over, gave a strange little neigh and trotted across to the lion. Please, she said, you're so beautiful. You may eat me if you like, I'd sooner be eaten by you than fed by anyone else. Dearest daughter, said Aslan, planting a lion's kiss on her twitching velvet nose, I knew you would not be long in coming to me. Joy shall be yours. Then he lifted his head and spoke in a louder voice. Now, breathe, he said, you poor, proud, frightened horse. Draw near. Nearer still, my son. Do not dare not to dare. Touch me, smell me. Here are my paws. Here is my tail. These are my whiskers. I am a true beast. Aslan, said Bree in a shaken voice, I'm afraid I must be rather a fool. Happy the horse who knows that while he is still young, or the human either. And I hope you can recognize what Lewis is saying here about John 19. John 20, verses 19 and following, where Thomas did not believe that Jesus had been resurrected in the body, and Jesus had to return to him and the other disciples. And then he says those words, do not dare to dare. Touch me. See that I have a body that is resurrected. Then Aslan makes himself known to Aravis and Huen. After that, Shasta arrives in the clothing of a prince, and he is announced as Prince Kor of Auchenland, and he explains to Aravis who he really is. He's the twin brother of Corin, stolen as a baby by a former treasurer of King Lune. Since Kor was firstborn, he will be the next king of Auchenland, which suits Corin fine. Being a prince can be much more fun than being a king. He and King Lune invite Aravis to come live with them at the castle, and as you might have guessed before, they eventually fall in love. And this is how C.S. Lewis describes it. Aravis had also had many quarrels, and I'm afraid even fights with Kor, who had formerly been Shasta. But they always made it up again, so that years later, when they were grown up, and they were so used to quarreling and making it up again, that they got married so as to go on doing it more conveniently. And after King Lune's death, they made a good king and queen of Auchenland. Thank you so much for listening and for being here with us today. And I hope to see you next week when we hear the story of the last battle.